So, okay, let's start off talking about violence against women and girls, something I know you care deeply about, having been the Director of Public Prosecutions. The most recent figures show that rape cases, there were over 55,000 in the year to March 2020, and actual convictions less than 1,500. What is going wrong and how are we going to fix it?
Well, that statistic is shocking. The idea that 98% of reported cases of rape don't end up with a charge or conviction is something which would disturb everybody. It's part of a wider issue that I think we have, which is violence against women and girls is pernicious, and we have some cases, some shocking cases that are turning points in criminal justice. Stephen Lawrence was one of them on the race issue. James Bolger was another of them in relation to children and society. Sarah Everard, in a way, needs to be a turning point. Terrible case and grief, unspeakable grief of her family and friends. It has to be a turning point where we look again at violence against women and girls, recognise the scale of it, and understand why it is that so many women and girls experience fear on our streets and at home, why so many of those that are subjected to abuse or sexual violence feel they can't come forward at all to the criminal justice system, because 9 out of 10 don't come forward, and then why so many feel that they can't manage the journey through criminal justice. And this has been, the issues there have been there for a very, very long time. I was grappling with them when I was Director of Public Prosecutions.
Well, I was going to ask
and
you that.
We really need action now.
You obviously are at the coalface of some of this. Was there any cases that particularly stuck out for you or made you change your views?
Yeah, I had a number of cases, but one particularly was significant for me. John and Penny Clough, they lost their daughter. Their daughter was subjected to domestic abuse by her partner. She hid it. She didn't tell anyone, which often happens. Eventually, she was raped by her partner when she was pregnant.
Right.
And she did come forward and tell her parents and tell the police. The perpetrator was then arrested but released on bail. And whilst on bail, he brutally murdered her. And so you went from domestic violence to rape to murder. And John and Penny Clough were let down by the criminal justice system, so they wanted to see me as Director of Public Prosecutions, and I agreed to see them. And the day they were supposed to come and see me was the day that my daughter was born. And so we had this awful situation, really, where they'd lost their daughter. I just had a daughter born. I've kept up with both of them. They've been campaigning for change, and I now campaign with them. But it was that case that really has stuck in my memory, that transition from domestic violence, the fact that their daughter felt she couldn't tell anyone, then on to rape, then on to murder, and then the criminal justice system let down the parents. And we campaigned together for change after that, but it's just a small example of just how pernicious violence against women and girls is.
In terms of what we actually do about it, though, the Labour official account tweeted that rape had been effectively decriminalised. Did you sanction that, and was that a responsible thing to do?
Well, that quote, those words, actually come from the Victims Commissioner. This is the independent commissioner appointed by the government, Vera Baird. She looked at the statistics. She looked at that particular statistic that, less than 2% of cases actually make it through the criminal justice system. And those were her words of advice, actually, to the government in her report. So whilst it's true that some Conservative MPs have complained about that, actually, I think the bigger question is, having been given that advice, what have you done about it?
Just in terms of what they're doing about it, the government has got a rape review. The consultation is going to run in summer. You presumably support that?
Well, look, I've been working with others on the issues of violence against women and girls for many, many years. We've had reviews, we've had consultations, we've had discussions. We don't actually need, we know any more of reviews. We need action. I had proposed a victims law 5 years ago on a cross-party basis, and still nothing has been done about it. And I think the strong feeling from those that have campaigned on this for many, many years is, a review's all very well, but we don't need reviews, we need action.
And the PM said in the comments yesterday that you need social and cultural change. Do you think he's got the moral authority to do that, given some of the remarks he's made in the past about women?
I'm glad that yesterday there was a constructive tone in Parliament, with all parties recognising that we must treat the last week as a turning point. That is a good thing. As for the Prime Minister, I mean, as many of my female colleagues point out to me in Parliament, you know, this is the Prime Minister that when they were going public with some of the things that have been said to them, the misogyny that they faced, he dismissed it as humbug. And so I think he's got some way to go on this. But look, yesterday was constructive. And if we are to do something about violence against women and girls, we need everybody to pull together.
Do you think he's sexist?
Well, I think that he was far too dismissive of misogyny. I mean, you know, I remember the afternoon in Parliament where women were standing up and saying, this is what has been said to me and about me. And to dismiss that as humbug, I think, was obviously the wrong thing to do, but was very raw for those women who were going public what had been said about them.
And so, okay, let's go on to COVID and the inquiry, and Labour calling today for that public inquiry. The government's still pushing back on that. Jonathan Van Tam said yesterday that any inquiry now would be, to quote him, an unwelcome distraction for me personally when I'm very focused on the vaccine programme. He's got a point, hasn't he, that this is maybe not the moment?
Look, I think we need an inquiry. And Rachel Reeves and I have spent a lot of time with bereaved families hearing their stories, and they have been the most difficult meetings I've had in the last year, talking to those families, and they want closure, they want justice, they want their questions answered, and we can't keep saying now is not the time. We come out of restrictions.
But you could wait until after the vaccine programme is completed, couldn't you?
Well, we come out of the restrictions in June, and we hope the country then opens up. We go back to normal, or a degree of normality, and that is the time to start this inquiry. And of course there's always the argument this is not the right time. That's the argument the government put forward last summer. At the end of the first wave, we said to the government, have a rapid review so you don't make the same mistakes in the autumn. They didn't, and they made the same mistakes.
But when the Deputy Chief Medical Officer says, look, can we just get the vaccine programme done and then we definitely should do it, couldn't you wait till July? I mean, it's only a few more weeks.
Well, you know, whether it's June or July, of course, nobody's going to quibble over June or July. But what we're saying, it's got to start as soon as the restrictions are lifted. Now, if there's an argument for saying that's July or August, then fair enough. But I don't think we can just park it off for years to come.
OK, and on COVID government performance, you've talked a lot about the government's failures in the past year over COVID, but when you actually look at the polling, they're 13 points ahead of Labour. Boris Johnson's now rated higher than you when it comes to who would be the best Prime Minister. If they've done such a bad job, how come the public are much more into the Conservatives and Boris Johnson than they are into Labour and Keir Starmer?
Well, those polls have bounced around. In the autumn, they were telling a different story. I think what's happened is there was undoubted incompetence and slowness to act last year, whether it was going into the lockdowns, whether it was getting test and trace and isolate working, whether in the initial stage it was getting protective equipment to the front lines. That was real incompetence, real slowness, and you know, tragically we had a second wave where there were more deaths than the first wave. Now we're in the vaccine rollout. It's going well, and that's a good thing, and we're completely supportive of that. And I think that there's undoubtedly a vaccine bounce for the government. And I want the vaccine
Makes your job
programme
hard, doesn't it?
I want the vaccine programme to succeed, and I'm not going to say anything against it. And therefore, you know, if it rolls out quicker and more efficiently than anywhere else, that is a good thing, and I'm hugely supportive. But does it lead to a vaccine bounce in the polls? I think it does. It may not be the only reason, but it's very significant.
But it's hard to handle, isn't it? I mean, you're going into a massive set of elections and you really are in a bad place, aren't you, particularly in Scotland?
Well, it's a pandemic, and that makes ordinary politics much more difficult. I took the decision that the Labour Party would be a constructive opposition, support the government where it was the right thing to do, for example, on the vaccine, criticise them where they were in the wrong. And I think that's the right approach to have taken. But we are in a pandemic. Here in Scotland, we've got a new leader, Anna Sawar, who is 3 weeks into office and doing a fantastic job, who is utterly focused on what we need in Scotland, which is a recovery and a recovery plan.
In terms of Scotland, what's success for you? Is it holding seats rather than losing seats?
Well,
I mean, what is it?
We've got a challenge in Scotland. We've got a new leader who is already shifting the polls positively for us. There are clear dividing lines now, which is really important, because you've got the Scottish Conservatives who want to go back to what we had before, the injustice and inequality of the system we had before. You've got the SNP who are increasingly obsessed with independence and putting that above all else. And then you've got Scottish Labour saying the focus has to be on the recovery.
I get what you're...
So there's a very clear divide now going into these elections. That is a good thing.
I get what you're trying to sell, but in a generation, Labour have gone from being the first party in Scotland to the third. You've got 32 fewer seats than you had in the first Parliament. So my question to you is really simple. What's success for you here? Is it holding seats? If you come out the other side of the May election in the same place as you went in, is that a victory for you in those circumstances?
We want to improve. We're fighting for every vote. We're already seeing the polls move a bit positively for us. Let that continue. Our new leader, Anna Sarwar, has been in for less than 3 weeks, but we're fighting for every vote.
And just finally, Sir Keir, Scotland is your biggest problem, isn't it? I mean, Labour's never won a majority without Scotland. In the last election, you won 1 out of 59 seats. Is this your biggest problem as Labour leader? Is this the biggest barrier to getting back to number 10 for Labour?
I'm here in Scotland, and Scotland is really important to me and to the Labour Party.
It's a bit hopeless, though, isn't it?
It's very important in these elections in terms of the make-up for the Parliament, very important to the future of the United Kingdom, and very important at the general election. That's why we have to improve the Labour vote in Scotland, rebuild trust, and get back to winning ways in Scotland. We've got a mountain to climb, I accept that, but Scotland is very important to me and to the Labour Party.
Does it keep you awake at night, Scotland, worrying about it?
Well, it doesn't keep me awake at night, but I can't underestimate or overemphasise just how important Scotland is to me and to the Labour Party.
And just finally, one more thing, just on a referendum. If Nicola Sturgeon wins Holyrood, is that a mandate to call a second referendum?
I think that in the middle of a pandemic, a divisive referendum would be the last thing that Scotland needs. What we need to focus on is the recovery, and this is a very clear dividing. The very idea that in 2021, as we come out of the pandemic and the economy needs to be rebuilt, the next few years is going to be crucial for the Scottish economy, that we need a divisive referendum which will do nothing for rebuilding the economy, I think is fundamentally wrong.
Okay, thank you very much.